Hi, and welcome to More Than a Refresh, a podcast about data and the people who wrangle it. I'm Amanda Nystrom, the Chief Operating Officer at Command Prompt, a leader in open source excellence since 1997. We hope that you enjoy the podcast today and contact us for your Postgres and full stack needs, including 24/7 support. Find us at 503-667-4564 at commandprompt.com or at sales@commandprompt.com. Enjoy.
More Than a Refresh is brought to you by Greenplum Database. Greenplum is a PostgreSQL-based, open-source, massively parallel database for analytics, machine learning, and AI. A VMware technology, Greenplum is a modern database that isn't limited by your data size or vertical scaling limitations. For more information or to get in touch, visit greenplum.org.
Welcome to More Than a Refresh, a podcast about data and the people who wrangle it. Our guest today is Nikolai from Postgres AI. Nikolai, introduce yourself.
Hi, JD. Thank you for the invitation. My name is Nikolai Samokhvalov. Samokhvalov is hard to pronounce to most Americans, I know, but that's why I do it. And I'm like very long-term Postgres user, Postgres, how's called, like evangelist or something like that. Since I think 2005.
2005. So you and I, we first met in Maryland at Postgres Conference East back in 08, I think it was.
Right. It
was, what did you think of that show?
It was the second conference outside of Russia for me. The first one is 2007 PGCon. Since I was...
Okay.
I took some part of development of XML data type and functions together with Pavel Stechel and Peter Eisentraut. So, and at the same time, I also was already a co-founder and CTO of some social networks in Russia. Actually, historically, the first social network was called Moy Krug. It's like My Circle. It was sold to Yandex. And of course, we used Postgres because it was my choice. And I came to Maryland to talk about how Postgres is good for Web 2.0.
2.0, back in the day.
Yes, my talk was called like Postgres is good for Web 2.0. So this is my topic. Yeah.
Well, for those who don't know or have just started listening, I've been an organizer of the United States Postgres Conference I started it back in 2007. Our first one was at Portland State. And we went from running in little community colleges. We ran in like Seattle Community College at one point. Now when we run at things like Marriott's and Sheridan's. And it's all nonprofit and volunteer driven. In your professional life, I mean, one of the things that you've said, and you allude to this already in our discussion, you said that, you're addicted to Postgres.
Yep.
I've been known to use it on occasion. So why don't you talk to me about that? Why are you addicted to Postgres?
Yeah, well, I don't like a lot of things in Postgres, but still I'm addicted, and I don't see any better solutions. So sometimes even like I remember in our Russian-speaking community, I was blamed for criticism because I know like I raised so many problems, but still I love Postgres. And why I'm addicted? I had education in the area of computer science, and we focused on databases theory, and so on. And it was very good, the best I would say in Russia. Then I even was briefly a teacher in Moscow State University, showing Postgres. But then startups and Web 2.0 was booming, and I was lucky enough to become a co-founder, and I needed to choose some open source. So I had some experience with Oracle and SQL Server in my early years of career. In banks, some boring stuff, banking software, and so on. I don't like it because of very long release cycles. But web attracted me very quickly because of very fast feedback from users. So we needed to choose database technology for our social network. And I first, of course, chose MySQL. But it took me only 1 week for me to realize that I cannot survive with MySQL because it doesn't follow the principles I learned at university. And the problems like some 000 dates and so on. It was, I remember it was also my sum 3.23, I don't remember exactly, but I needed to repair table a lot and so on. So no reliability.
So this would be like pre-NODB days and things like that for MySQL.
Well, NoDB was there, but it lacked something like full text search or something. So you needed to combine things, as I remember it. And after 1 week, I was in the same stress as in the stress working for banking software, developing banking software. But then I was lucky enough because we hired a student, like last year student or even PhD student from Moscow State University from astronomy department, who told us, "Oh, I know Oleg Bartonov, and there is something called Postgres. You should meet with Oleg and you should check Postgres." This is what we did, and this is how I met Oleg. And I checked Postgres, and took me 1 day to convert. I just replaced, this back ticks to double quotes, and
Right.
fixed a few problems. One of them was, by the way, interesting. I developed my object relational mapping. I called it data mappers, following some big and for the patterns, like object patterns. But when I switched, I saw how Postgres it's good everywhere, but dealing with metadata, working with system catalogs, it was slow. So I needed to put an additional layer of caching. This was the only concern I had at the time to Postgres. But later, I had many more concerns because I think it was 8.0 or 1. And we had issues with auto vacuum tuning, and I think maybe auto vacuum didn't exist at that time. Also replication. Replication was a big thing. So we need to deal with Sloaney, then Londeste, and so on and so on.
Yeah. Jan is, as you know, but for our guests, Jan is the primary architect of Sloaney back then. And I have sworn at him with many various flavors of curse words because of Sloaney.
Right.
Before we get back into the Postgres, though, we talked a little bit about your background. What did you growing up? We all have our visions and our dreams. What did you want to be when you were growing up? When we were young?
Interesting question. I had a career in social networks area, so Postgres for me was just a tool. I founded 3 social networks. 2 of them were very successful and with good exits. And I was always thinking about myself as a founder, and I was trying to move away from technical field. But then in 2013, so this dream didn't actually was accomplished fully. Only kind of partially, because there are much bigger social networks that I built. I built only up to 20 million users. It's small size compared to the whole audience we have, even if you consider only Russian segment of internet. But then when I moved to the US in 2013, I found myself it was like a coincidence. At the same time, I needed to convert all my income to US, because it's not fun when you have income in rubles and then Crimea happens, and then ruble drops 2 times and so on. And also remote work at that time. We did it that time much before COVID, but it was very hard. At the same time, I found that a lot of companies started to use Postgres already there, and being in Silicon Valley, meeting some founders, mentioning that I know Postgres, I started to receive requests to help. And this is how I was reborn, actually. And I decided to stop my all social network business completely and just focus on Postgres entirely. And so I have a new dream. I have a new dream to make a revolution in the development industry related to databases. Which revolution we can discuss, because I have ideas. but I just want to make something interesting and big and influential and feel that I made something. Not just build some company. It's not enough for me. I want to change how people work with databases, actually.
I think that's interesting because one of the reasons that we do Postgres conference, right? We do the whole people Postgres data thing, where we're trying to encourage our community to think beyond the fact that that yes, Postgres is the one thing we have in common, right? No matter what, we have that in common, you and I. But also that we exist outside of that. That some of us are hunters and some of us are athletes. Not a lot of us are athletes, but some of us are athletes,
Right.
and some of us are chefs and that type of thing. And to bring about a more complete picture of who is actually in the Postgres community. You know, back in 2007, this is before you came to the States, and I'm curious as to why you've immigrated to the States. But before we get into that, you did start, I guess, Russia Postgres, or the Russian-speaking community, correct?
Right.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, yes. So I was very happy to find such good database system as Postgres. I quickly fell in love with it, and so I had a strong feeling with people that I worked with. We had strong feeling that it's only the beginning; it should grow, and we decided to. At the same time, in 2007. A technical conference called High Load also organized, and I somehow became a part of it as a community program community member. And first guest I invited was Bruce Momjan, so it was like interesting. And I know you also visited this conference. And it was 2007 was interesting year in general, and we at the same time we also decided we want to organize a user group because we heard this about such concept. So this guy, his name is Ivan. We hired he is, by the way, still astronomer. Together with him, we organized this user group in Moscow. And we did a lot of interesting things. For example, we in 2008, I remember, and I saw mentioning later many times, we organized a so-called like a battle between Postgres and MySQL. We invited both developers who develop both systems and big users who have big OLTP systems running on these databases. And it was like round table style, but table was divided into two halves. And big audience, they asked a lot of questions. But somehow that event was stopped. It ended my chapter 1 with user group because I felt so nervous organizing it. Maybe just lack of experience, So I decided to make a pause, and I continued only after 2013, maybe. When I saw how George Berkus is running a user group in San Francisco, this inspired me once again. Mm-hmm.
So now you're in the States. How does your relationship with obvious issues now in Russia? I mean, how are your relationships there?
Yeah, good question. In 2013, my wife and I decided by purpose. Then Russia invaded Crimea. Crisis for us, it was like logically was already immediate, like it's something wrong is happening. For example, interesting fact that I worked on XML using Google Summer of Code grant sitting in Crimea, where I also met Alexei Klukin. I know he worked sometime in your company long ago, and it was feeling very good to sit in a very beautiful place like Crimea and work, but it was much before invasion happened. But when invasion happened, the ruble dropped, and also this remote work, I lost a few important people who apparently could not work with 11 hours time difference. It's very, you need to be very asynchronous. So I needed to, I've got a big crisis actually. So I just I realized that I will continue coming to Moscow, and I had offline meetups since 2014. I remember I was asking who can host, who can help hosting, and Yandex was one of companies who said yes, we can, and more than 200 people came. At some point, they closed registration because they said we are out of coffee break capacity, because they wanted to provide coffee to everyone also. Like, okay.
Right.
And also they asked last minute, they asked, is it okay if we also add a very small lightning talk, like 10 minutes about our stuff? I said, okay, you're like hosting. Of course, what is it? They said, it's how we migrated Yandex Mail from Oracle to Postgres. I said, what? It should be like, it should be 2 hours.
Yeah, we want a real talk, not 10 minutes. We want the whole thing.
Yeah, and they did later at different conferences later. It was an interesting use case as well, showing how Postgres can replace Oracle in very heavily loaded system. So it was this is how user group reborn. But at the same time, I was visiting, right? Because of business and so on. At the same time, I knew it, but that I like two things. First, I want to use the power of online. So I started to do online events together with Ilya Kosmodemyansky, co-founder of DataYgrid, the consulting company. So they we started to do also online events. And the second thing is that actually this at that point the group was called PostgreSQL Russia. At the same, I already saw many people are outside. A lot of people are outside. Somebody is in Australia, somebody is Germany, US, everywhere. I was meeting people in San Francisco meetup group who worked with me like a few years ago. It was interesting. So I decided to rename, but on purpose, to rename to RU Postgres, highlighting that it's not Postgres Russia anymore, it's Russian-speaking Postgres. Because we have, I also already, it was after Crimea happened, and I also feeling like Ukrainians also speak Russian, most of them. And I also, I don't want to lose them. And I have so many friends from Ukraine. This is like, it was painful for me when it happened. What happened this year is like, it's a shock. And
So,
pain, constant pain.
yeah, if I recall, and I actually could be wrong about this because I sometimes get you and one other Russian confused. But did you recently stop offering to help with one of the conferences in Russia?
Yeah, as I've said, I was one of program committee members of HighLoad++ since the very beginning in 2007, and I was responsible for database section of the conference, bringing various guests, a lot of Postgres guests, of course, and I proposed them internally in the chat. I proposed them to make some statement against war after February 24th. But my messages was deleted by the main organizer. So I said either I leave or I will repeat these messages. So it was internal censorship. So I decided to step back from this after how many years? A lot of years.
So, yeah, I mean, if it was 2007 when you started, I mean, that's like 16 years. Yeah, it's unfortunate that the Russian government has chosen the path that it has, because it really puts a strain on the community, because there are PostgreSQL. A lot of people don't realize this is heavily developed by a lot of the Russian community, and I'm often asked, why would I, even before this happened, but even with like Crimea and things like that, why would I be willing to go to Moscow and teach? Or why would I be willing to go to Beijing and teach? And my response is always the same. It's like, I can't change governments, but I can help people, right? The person learning Postgres or wanting to contribute to Postgres, they don't have any control over what the government decides to do of their country, right? But I certainly can understand, I think that everybody recognizes that the current actions by Russia are out of scope, right? It's not, this isn't some,
Mm-hmm.
it's brutal. And Crimea was bad. I mean, we lost two longtime developers. You mentioned one of them, Alexei, because of the Crimea issue.
Mm-hmm.
And they were, vital members of our team. They helped us develop many of our technologies. And because of the actions of, a bad actor being Russia, we were no longer able to support them. And that's really unfortunate. Now, luckily, they both have, they've all both moved to Germany now. So they're doing much better. So you call it we discussed this already, actually, why you call it the Russian speaking user group. What role do you think that diversity plays with Postgres developers, right? Because we've seen a lot of consolidation with Postgres lately over the past couple of years. I mean, OpenSCG disappeared. Creditive has basically disappeared. Second Quadrant has been absorbed by Enterprise DB. I think it's Enterprise DB 7.0 now, but I mean, Enterprise DB. So do you think that we're, as a community, that we're getting weakened by this consolidation or not?
Well, it's an interesting question. Also worth mentioning how actively Amazon and Microsoft are hiring people lately, right? It's like a lot of hackers hired, and it looks like two huge camps are organized. Well, at least it's two, not one. And plus, ADB, it's already three camps. I don't know. I feel a lack of diversity all the time I work. I know Postgres and deal with it as a project. A lack of diversity all the time. Like, so you mentioned Russian-speaking contributors, but none of them are really involved into making decisions, core decisions or something. No females there as well. So this diversity issue is not new; it's old. But today we have, back to Russian-speaking community, we have a big division. It's divided. And for example, the product we developed, Database Lab Engine, before this active phase of war started, I've heard very good use cases. For example, Burger King Russia. Good, okay. They use us. Good. I hope they're still there. I'm not sure because McDonald's and Starbucks left and many others left. Or Russian Telecom. Russian Telecom is a huge, state-controlled telecom. It's like monopoly in Russia. And I was surprised to hear they use us in a few projects already, and they are very happy. Our open source part, not paying us yet, I thought. But then I saw after the war, active phase of war started, this guy who implemented our solution inside their company, he said that the Ukrainian language is not real language, a lot of harassment things. So I excluded them from everywhere and told him directly that I'm not going to deal with him anymore. So this division is very hard, and it splits in families, not just Postgres community, and we feel it. But I want to remind that in the world there are 3 million Russian-speaking people, and only 300 million Russian-speaking people. Only 140 of them live in Russia, less than 50%. Right? So still, I'm sure this year made big contribution to reducing Russian language usage. Right? Even, for example, I do more English-speaking events than before February 24th. But of course, all Ukrainians prefer choosing their own language, not speaking Russian anymore. This is very understandable. But still, a lot of people outside Russia. So probably we should think about how to preserve RU Postgres as as community, and I know exact people who are supporting the war inside Postgres community in Russia, and I'm not going to work with these people. But the bigger problem to me is that there are good people inside bad organizations. For example, I consider Postgres Pro as a supporter for, because when it was founded, it was founded after Crimea in 2015. With the idea of replacement of Oracle and SQL Server to help Russia to be independent, because Russia understood that it should be independent from the US. So some money supported this. I know a person who provided money, like it's not a secret. And Oleg and Theodore and Alexander Karatkov at that time, he left already. They just were lucky to meet that guy and organize a company. Everything was looking great in the beginning, but the signs like visit of Minister of Telecom to the first and the second conference already was like a bell for me. It ringed some bell to me already in 2015, and. But now it's obvious they have contracts with military organizations, with organizations which directly, with secret service organizations, and directly or indirectly through some additional consultant companies. Their DNA is to help Russia to be independent and make Russia strong in terms of software, and military organizations use Postgres Pro. So I think. It should be like obvious to everyone who visit their conference, for example, that this organization is involved into war through Postgres.
Do you think that, actually, before I ask this question, I do want to address, you mentioned something about core. For those that don't know, and frankly, most don't, the PostgreSQL community, PostgreSQL.org community specifically, its steering committee is called Core, and the Core group, I think it's 7 people now. What Nikolai was referencing is there are no women on Core, which has always been a relative, depending on who you are, a relative source of contention. They're not elected; they're self-appointed. So that there's by default a little bit of conflict of interest in terms of the value of Core versus the value to the community and things like that. It all, from one perspective, nobody complains because everybody's making money hand over fist with Postgres, right? I mean, if you know PostgreSQL and you are not making money, you are the problem, right? That's how popular PostgreSQL is right now. But on the other hand, for people like Nikolai and I myself, who've been, I've been in the community since, I've actually been in the Postgres world longer than PostgreSQL has existed. It's been I don't want to overpronounce it, but it is a little bit of a source of contention. Core probably should be elected. Contributors should be the ones that vote, but then you have to determine like who's a contributor. Are people who speak but don't do code, are they contributors? Things like that. Anyway, moving on from that, because we could talk about the politics of PostgreSQL.org all day long, and I don't think it helps anybody. Isn't there something to be said? And believe me, I understand what you're saying about Postgres Pro. Clearly, the connections are made that they're working with the military, working with the government. And obviously, Russia has done some bad things. But as a proud American, I can also say that my country has also done bad things.
Yeah,
and
I agree.
Right, yeah. So there is, we're not a perfect country. And we certainly don't always have perfect leadership. And, you read about these things now where, certain developers are trying to create ethical open source licenses. Or you get people striking at Microsoft because Microsoft does business with the U.S. military. How is that different than, say, Postgres Pro doing business with the Russian military. I mean, they're a Russian company, right? So where's the conflict in your mind?
The conflict is that invasion to Iraq was terrible as well, but there is
Yes.
opposition which is not in prison in the US. Opposition in Russia, it's either outside Russia or in prison. So there are zero chances to fight it. That's it. There are zero chances
So
that it will end from inside. It will not end from inside. In the US, there is always a hope for a better future because there are many forces. They sometimes fight, but there is a hope that something better will win. In Russia, there is no hope. So it's total. And for example, today's news: Navalny, his lawyers have no connection to him anymore because they put some censorship machine between them, breaking all the rules, and he's in special. Oh, so let's skip it. It's bad. It's very bad, and no hope. This is how it is, and people brainwashed and so on. But in the US, people brainwashed, but differently. There are many camps as well. I like when there are many camps because we can reach some balance. We can find some there is competition, right? We can hope that something better will win soon, always.
So what we're really talking about here, I mean, at least from the U.S. perspective, is in the U.S. there is the concept of rights, right? Yep. We have the First Amendment. We have a right to peacefully. This is something that a lot of people like to forget. We do not have a right to riot. We have a right to peacefully assemble and protest. We have freedom of speech, right to bear arms, those types of things.
Freedom of speech, yeah. Freedom of speech is very important, and in Russia, it's no more, not anymore. For example, for my tweets, I can have up to 10 or 15, I don't remember, years in prison, officially by law, because of.
So you're not ever going back to Russia
until Putin leaves? No. While Putin leaves? No. Yeah. Until Putin dies.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, what we're talking about is the ability to disagree, right? In Russia
right, yes.
now,
to discuss, yes,
you can't disagree. Like I can say by being in the United States, and I think that a lot of people really need to recognize this because it's similar in China, right? As well as many other countries in the world, in that the U.S. citizen or people who are legally here have rights that in other countries just don't exist. Yep. Right? The fact that you can, and I'm going to be harsh here, but in the United States, it is legal to say fuck Biden.
Yep.
Right? It's legal to do that. You cannot be arrested for saying that. You cannot be censored or anything else like that. Or fuck Trump.
Or to blame some company for bad things. It's also possible.
Yeah, or to blame. Yeah, absolutely. As long as you're not lying about it, right? You're able to voice that opinion.
Yes.
And I think that it's an important distinction in the United States because not all. I mean, even countries that you would think do, don't. Germany, for example, has mostly free speech, but there are certain things that you are not allowed to do in Germany because of their history with Nazis and things like that. But it's, in the United States, for example, it's not nice, but hate speech is legal. It is legal to hate in the United States. Right. And a lot of people would say, well, that's not okay. Well, okay, sure, hate is bad. I would agree with that. But, that's part of freedom, right? Is the right to disagree.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So, we talked a little bit about your relationship, how things have evolved over post-Crimea. You came to the States. Obviously, rubles are certainly not a good investment. Haven't been for a long time, really. Do you think that, and this isn't, I mean, we just talked about how we have this ability in the United States and we don't in other countries. But do you think that things like RU Postgres root Postgres. Should those groups be speaking out? I mean, against at least the ones that aren't in Russia, right? Because in Russia, it's a different problem because they could go to jail, they can be killed.
Yep, and
But
we need to admit it. Many people have strong fears to not support, and they just support just because they fear express different statements. So like it's natural to stick to the to a strength, right? So like
one of the things I spoke to what's it, you'll know him.
If you want to express different opinion, you should be prepared for prison or you need to leave. That's it. This is, for example,
in Russia. Right.
Yeah. So and if we talk about root Postgres, first thing we did with Ilya, I told him like I cannot do it anymore when February 24th happened, and first thing we did, we just paused. We don't do anymore right now. We don't do it. So we don't do any talks. One of the latest talks was from a Postgres Pro guy. His name is Igor Rogov. And here I wanted to say a very important thing. We should distinguish organizations and people working at those organizations. Because like otherwise, like we lose of them all. Igor Rogov is good expert in education in the area of Postgres. And he just recently published English translation of his book called PostgreSQL Internals. It's a great material, very, very good material. But he's working at a better organization. What to do? So we paused. We don't do any more root Postgres events. Maybe just temporarily, maybe not. I don't know. And we also posted something related to show people that we are against war. We not like. Also, there are different grades of being against war. Many people are saying, let's write a letter that we ask our government not to do it. This is what I'm against as well. You cannot ask them. If somebody rapes a woman, for example, you cannot ask to stop. You should either fight or do something demand, right? Not ask. So we showed something, like we posted something, that some links to good materials, how to deal with this stress, and we just post. What's next? I don't know. I switched to English events right now. So
That's fair.
The pen is still here after half a year. The pen is still here, and yeah.
Well, I mean, you obviously have family back there, probably still, and I think that's something that we all need to recognize as well. Is that in Russia, and we've already said this, but they don't have the right to free speech. But a lot of the people that are involved, and I can't say all because I don't know them, but a lot are involved in doing what they do because they fear for their families. They fear for their daughters, their sons,
Right.
their husbands, their wives. And if you live in a society where you're surrounded, where everybody but you has a gun, you're going to do what the people with the gun, says. That because by our natural existence, it's self-preservation. What do you think? Do you think that open source, like the open source community, do you think when we think about this, do we have a role in war? Right? I mean, is there? I'm not even quite sure how to ask it, right? Because certainly we know that this war is being supported. I don't even consider it a war really, but supported by our work. We know this. The work that you have done, the work that I have done, the work that our competitors and friends have done in this community, not just Postgres, but Linux and everything else. Do we have a role of some sort to play? Because war's different now. This isn't 1944, right? There's quite a bit of war that takes place over internet, over the broadband, over connections that are made, things like that.
Yeah, this is a very difficult question to me. So I'm I'm sure communities, open source communities, should care about how open source they develop is used, and what organizations are involved and what they do. But I have zero examples of that for big open source projects. I don't know any examples of any open source project which expressed obvious position against war. And like I see opposite movements, like let's keep connections and so on and so on. And my strong belief that we should keep connections, but not with organizations, with people only. If organizations is involved, we should not keep connection, because it makes community weaker. For example, I have two big reasons why I don't feel stronger connection with Postgres as I could. First is lack of good workflow. Each time I try to propose anything in email and so on, I'm lost in email. So I want GitHub, GitLab, or anything like that. And such strong project as Postgres could have it. So they lost me as a contributor, even to documentation. I still try to do it sometimes, but it does work for me. So I'm not too young actually. I'm 40. So like email is fine for me, but I cannot. When you felt how GitHub or GitLab or I don't know, like other systems from Atlassian and so on, they work, you simply cannot deal with these. Oh, in that line of that patch, you wrote this. Now let's synchronize. I want comments for merge requests or pull requests. It's obvious. I want to discuss particular line and have threads and so on. So Postgres lacks it still, and this makes me feel less as a part of Postgres community. And another thing is this: currently, no statements, like I see zero chances for any statements against war. Moreover, for example, Bruce Momjan, we had several discussions, like oral and written discussions with him about this situation. And he listened to me not going to Russia in March. It would be insane. But he participated online in conferences, Highload and Postgres Pro conference, pgconf.ru. And he still plans continuing it and thinking like working with these organizations and just not to lose connections with them. What can I say? Okay. But the problem is that I'm sure Bruce doesn't understand the depth of the problem. And the interesting point is that his own, ancestors, right? 100 years ago, migrated from Armenia because of some conflict. So I would recommend Bruce to think twice about it.
So that is an obvious path, right? Is that those of us who are in the community that are able to speak, not all of us are good at it. We just don't support, we don't support Highload or pgconf.ru or those types of things. I mean, that is an obvious, easy path. But it does kind of go back to the idea of, when I was mentioning earlier, I can't change governments, but I can help people.
Right.
So if I speak right now with pgconf.ru, I'm not thinking about it from a perspective that I'm helping the Russian government. I'm thinking about it from the perspective that I am helping the Russian people.
Right, but this conference is created to promote Postgres Pro. The only organizer is Postgres Pro.
That is true. And you mentioned earlier that Postgres Pro is working with the military.
Right.
So I guess, in that particular situation, I think you've got a good point. I think it's a challenge, because open source is supposed to be agnostic. We're supposed to be above the fray. It's supposed to be about the technology, right? So I'm not sure if there's an easy answer there. I will say this: I understand why you no longer contribute to Postgres. PostgreSQL.org. I'm going to back up. First off, you do contribute to Postgres. You don't contribute to PostgreSQL.org. I mean, Postgres.ai contributes to Postgres, the community, just not PostgreSQL.org's community. I don't really participate with Postgres.
Right.
Well, there's, in my mind, the way I always frame it, because I deal with a lot of sponsors, I deal with a lot of companies, is that PostgreSQL.org is a member of the Postgres community. They are not the Postgres community. And the reason for that is I also think that Yugabyte, for example, is a member of the Postgres community. But Yugabyte's a fork, right?
Or Greenplum, for example.
Or Greenplum is actually an excellent example because they've been around forever. And I think it's an important distinction because the idea that somehow PostgreSQL.org is the center of all of this is arrogant, right? It's putting an artificial value on what everybody, only what they do. Now, it's not that, I mean, you and I love PostgreSQL. The software is awesome. There's no arguing that. But you're right. The development model, development methodology, whatever you want to call it, is beyond broken. But it works for them, and that's fine. But they are not gaining nearly as many contributors. You know, I speak with Fortune 50 companies about this, and they're like, how am I going to be able to contribute to PostgreSQL.org? And I say, well, this is how it works. And universally, the response is, that's insane. Yep. We're not going to put our people through that, right? And it's just not something that, and that's fine. If PostgreSQL doesn't want those contributors, that's fine. They can do it the way that they do it. But I do think, you know, when we talk about open source as a whole, I mean, if we're supposed to be agnostic, I just think it's a challenge, I guess is what I'm saying. You know, I don't think there's necessarily one right answer. And obviously for yourself, it hits closer to home, right? I mean, this is your people, right? So, is there anything you want to bring up? I mean, do you want to talk a little bit about like Postgres.ai? What are we doing there?
Yeah, so I thought we would. I expected that we will talk a lot about politics, but I wanted not to exceed 50% of our discussion. But okay, it's very, you know, like it's very emotional, of course, and so on. And like I just wanted to emphasize. You wanted to say, okay, like we speak at some conference, we care about people. It's true, but don't expect that you will escape from making decision to express position again, related to war and all organizations involved. It's inevitable because I tried many years. I moved here. I thought, okay, Russia, do whatever you want, right? I will build my own new life here, but still some connections. Okay, like I can distinguish them. But anyway, this evil will spread even more. So everyone will need to make decision. And I hope, for example, Bruce will understand that I was right at some point. Enough about politics. As for let's frame it like this. I said I want to make revolution, and I see where development is weak in terms of working with databases. For example, like we know, DBAs usually have access to production. Developers don't. Only a few developers have. Only very experienced ones. Why? Usually, I thought it's because of security. But as I observe in many companies, security is not number one concern. It's maybe number two concern. Number one concern is that developers develop. They want to experiment. They want to move faster, and often they want to try not mature functionality. So if they have access to production, actually, like I saw some hackers, if you hire a great Postgres hacker to help with Postgres system, first thing they will do, they will try to use GDB and so on, and some experimental extensions and so on and so on. Yep. Maybe it's not a good idea because stability will decrease. It will go down. It will go down. So developers usually don't have access to production. But if, for example, if you want to optimize a query, you want to check a few index optimization ideas, new indexes or something. You want to create indexes and check how query execution changes. Usually, what do you do? Like create a clone in RDS if it's RDS or some other machine. And these machines are expensive to run. I mean, full-fledged clones, because you cannot optimize a query on different data set because different statistics, right? Mm-hmm. So you need the same size database, same data set, same statistics, and then you can experiment with query optimization. Of course, you can run explain, even analyze with buffers on production, but sometimes it's invasive. For example, if it's an update, even if you roll back, update or insert, for example, they will leave data tuples behind. So it's also like it's invasive. But creation of index, it's very stressful. And nobody will say, except a few DBAs, they only can do it because they have 15 years of experience, for example. Okay, they can do it. To create an unverified index right on production to save us from bad performance. So developers need some kind of clones that should behave where planner behaves same as on production. But full-fledged clones are expensive. And usually people end up sharing these clones. Some developer change something, some developer change something, like they conflict. This observation led us to the idea, let's have a shared environment where we will run thin clones based on copy on write. By default, it's provided by ZFS. And we will just run dozens of clones on one virtual machine, on one disk, or ABS volume, for example, if you are an AWS user. And 50 developers will run their experiments independently, checking various index ideas and so on. This is exactly what Database Lab Engine does. It's open source. We have much more around it. And for example, we put this to CI/CD pipelines, and we automatically test database migrations, not to allow people to deploy bad migrations. Right, so this is a very, very big topic, how to test various database functionality and changes automatically. So this what many companies like GitLab and many others use, and they love it actually, as I see. So like we're already doing this 2 years, and this is our product, and I think it's only the beginning. Recently, I saw Neon decided, Neon, for example, it's open source Aurora. They decided to switch to the same topic because Aurora, for example, provides thin clones as well. But in the case of Aurora, thin clones, you need to pay additionally for each clone for compute power. It's a separate.
That as well as I/O. They charge for I/O too.
So. I/O is also expensive, yes. But the problem, I mean, we run multiple Postgres on one VM with small shared buffers. And we trick Planner to behave the same as on production because Planner, as it turned out, that it's a big coincidence, I like it. Planner doesn't care about shared buffers value. It cares only about effective cache size. So we can set
really?
Yes. Otherwise, we wouldn't work properly. Yeah.
Okay. Fair enough.
So we use the same settings of the planner plus workmem. It's not considered as planner settings, but it also influences the plans. As on production, but we run small shared buffers, like small Postgres, and we have the same plans and same buffer numbers, same row numbers as on production, but like 50 independent clones on one machine, and you pay only for one machine. This is essential. So Neon, since they use Kubernetes, they decided to focus on testing in CI/CD using cloning, and somehow the terminology changed like to database branching.
Right.
I think database branching is different than cloning, so like I hope we will find some common ground here. I also know RealityDB is considering to support database branching natively inside Postgres. And some other companies like Supabase, they have it in roadmap. So I think it's only the beginning of big segment in software engineering, when we will have powerful database branching and testing capabilities. And
the Neon is actually pretty interesting to us. I've been playing with it off and on when I want to scratch an itch. I haven't tested it in about a month, but it's still pretty slow in comparison to native Postgres. So we're running out of time here. So I want to ask you 2 more questions. And outside of politics, outside of culture, outside of development models, things like that. But what is your favorite Postgres feature? Your favorite PostgreSQL feature?
Tough question, actually. There's so many features. What is with? Wow. My favorite feature of Postgres, because it behaves like Linux. It's maybe development also is like Linux style through mailing lists, but I like the behavior of as a product user here, because it has perfect console capabilities, PSQL. I can code anything and know behavior exactly. So it's like Linux style thing, right? I don't need the UI. I can use UI, but if I want very automated something, I can do it. And this is very good feature, like core feature, as I see it. There are many features I like for example, advanced SQL, very standard compatible, not 100% of course, but still. JSON, of course, a huge thing.
Yeah.
And so on and so on.
Well, for me, since I have always primarily been an ops guy, a DBA, right? I'm not an SQL developer. But so for me, the feature that I enjoy the most is transactional DDL, right?
Oh,
Being able to add a column or run a test, roll it back.
But nobody can use it in production under load, because create index concurrently and recreate index concurrently, they are not transactional.
Right.
So
okay.
These exclusions lead to us to big topic. I think improvements are needed. For example, like many things I have an article on PostgreSQL blog about, it's called 18 mistakes running DDL under load, something like this. So database migration mistakes. So it's easy to shoot your legs off.
All right. So here's the second question. And this one, I'm sure, will be controversial for our PostgreSQL members. What about PostgreSQL, I'm talking about the technology, do you hate? What is the worst thing for you with working with PostgreSQL? Because you actually mentioned this in the beginning. You said there's a lot of things you don't like. I mean, you love it, but there's a lot of things you don't like. So what is the thing that you hate even though you love it?
Well, yeah, I think it's related to lack of various observability capabilities still. There are many improvements that should be made there, but it's improving from release to release every year. But still, it's far from many commercial, very mature systems. Still far. Like dealing with log is painful sometimes. Or like, for example, there is a wait event type, wait event column in pgstat activity, but actually, I know the answer. Very, very outdated defaults. For example, query in pgstat activity is only 1024 bytes, right?
Yep.
And so many, like auto-vacuum settings, Maxwell size, they are so outdated if you use modern hardware. You always need to tune it.
No, I just actually did so I wrote a blog like in 2008 on what the minimum requirements for Postgres was. And I just updated it last month. And I actually mentioned that, like, there's other blogs out there that say you only need, say, a gig of disk space. But they don't take into account the fact that your default max wall size is 512 meg, right? So that doesn't even take into account that one small part, and then you still need room for your indexes and your data. No, I agree with you. And I think it goes back to the culture of the community, though, right? It was always this idea that very conservative, as well as being able to run on hardware. I mean, we're in the States. We have access to really fast hardware.
Run it on a teapot.
What was that?
Run it on a teapot.
On a teapot. That's right. All right. Well, hey, thank you for being a guest. And with that, this has been More Than a Refresh, a podcast about data and the people who wrangle it. My guest was Nikolai. I'm not going to try and say your last name, but he's with Postgres.ai. I recommend that you check it out, and see you next time.
This podcast is hosted by JD, Command Prompt founder and Postgres conference chair, and is produced by me, Lindsay Hooper, director of events at Command Prompt Inc. Command Prompt provides Postgres support, professional services, custom development, and community leadership. Since 1997, we've focused on providing just excellent service, custom tailored to your organization's needs. We'll see you soon, wherever you get your podcasts.